Hollywood has always been a place of legends, but some legends don't shine because of scandal or spectacle. They shine because of quiet dignity. James Garner was one of those rare stars. Born into hardship, scarred by loss and toughened by war, he carried himself not as a Hollywood prince, but as a man who understood struggle, loyalty and truth. On screen, audiences adored him in Maverick and the Rockford Files. He wasn't the typical hero. He was relatable, witty, flawed, and real. But behind the cameras, there was another story few ever heard. A story of friendship, loyalty, and gratitude. A story tied to one man whose crooked smile and wandering eye made him unforgettable, Jack Elam. To most, Elam was just the comic villain, the oddball outlaw. But to James Garner, he was something more, a true friend in an industry where friendship rarely survives. What was the bond that tied these two men together? And why did Garner choose to break his silence and speak so tenderly about Elam when Hollywood had long moved on? James Scott Bumgarner, later known to the world as James Garner, was born in Norman, Oklahoma in 1928, into a world already weighed down by the Great Depression. Life was never gentle to him. At just 5 years old, he lost his mother, a wound no child should ever carry. His father remarried, and the boy, who would one day charm millions, endured years of cruelty under a stepmother's hand. By 14, Garner had walked away from home. He drifted between relatives, worked odd jobs, and carried himself with the quiet resilience of someone who had already seen too much of life's unfairness. He dropped out of high school, not out of laziness, but because survival demanded it. Yet in those difficult years, something unshakable took root inside him, a deep empathy for ordinary people, and a no-nonsense grit that would later define his acting. Garner never wore his pain as a badge. He transformed it into authenticity. Every shrug, every dry-line delivery on screen carried the weight of a boy who had learned early that life is rarely fair, but dignity is always worth keeping. In the mid-1950s, James Garner's life seemed headed down the path of odd jobs and restless drifting. He had survived war, endured hardship, and was searching for something that felt like purpose. Then, almost by chance, acting found him. After a small, non-speaking role on Broadway, Warner Brothers offered him a contract. In 1957, everything changed. He was cast as Brett Maverick, the charming gambler of the hit television series Maverick. But Maverick wasn't the typical cowboy audiences were used to. He wasn't the square-jawed gunfighter who always won. He was witty, sarcastic, and often talked his way out of trouble rather than shooting his way through it. Garner infused the role with humor and humanity, and suddenly viewers saw a different kind of Western hero, one they could laugh with, one they could trust. Almost overnight, James Garner went from an unknown to a household name. Maverick ran for 5 seasons, but even after he left due to contract disputes, the mark was made. Garner wasn't just playing Maverick, he embodied the spirit of one, a man unafraid to bend the rules and destined to carve his own path in Hollywood. James Garner's rise did not stop with Maverick. If anything, that was only the beginning. Over the next 5 decades, he built a career that proved consistency and authenticity could outshine scandal and spectacle. In 1974, he returned to television in a role that would become just as iconic, private investigator Jim Rockford in the Rockford Files. The series broke the mold, offering audiences a detective who was more human than hero, and the performance earned Garner an Emmy for Outstanding Lead Actor. On the big screen, he moved effortlessly from drama to comedy. He stole scenes in The Great Escape, 1963, charmed critics in Victor Victoria, 1982, and even earned an Academy Award nomination for Murphy's Romance, 1985. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Garner never relied on theatrics. His power was subtle. His wit, his timing, his ability to feel real in every frame. Hollywood honored him with a star on the Walk of Fame, Lifetime Achievement Awards, and induction into the Television Hall of Fame. But perhaps the greatest tribute was that audiences never saw him as a celebrity first. They saw him as a man they could trust. For many who grew up in the 1970s, James Garner wasn't just an actor. They knew him as Jim Rockford. The Rockford Files debuted in 1974 and quickly became more than a detective show. It became a reflection of American life in an era when trust in authority was fragile. Unlike the brooding, hard-nosed gumshoes of television past, Rockford was different. He lived in a modest trailer on the beach, drove a Pontiac Firebird, and worked for clients who often couldn't afford to pay him. He hated guns, disliked violence, and relied more on wit than fists. Garner infused Rockford with warmth and dry humour, and in doing so created a character who felt more human than heroic. Viewers recognised themselves in him, struggling with bills, questioning the system, yet holding on to decency. Each episode blurred the line between drama and comedy, offering suspense alongside laughter, tension followed by a wink. Rockford wasn't glamorous, and neither was Garner. That's why the role resonated. He wasn't pretending to be larger than life. He was showing that integrity, resilience, and kindness could stand tall even in a cynical world. For 6 seasons, Rockford became a trusted companion in living rooms across America, and the role earned Garner not only an Emmy, but a place in television history. Decades later, The Rockford Files remains a masterclass in character-driven storytelling, and Jim Rockford still feels like someone you'd want as a neighbour, a confidant, or a friend. In truth, Rockford was Garner, and Garner was Rockford. Away from the spotlight, James Garner lived a love story that quietly defied Hollywood's odds. In 1956, at a political rally, he met Lois Clark. Just 14 days later, they were married. To many, it seemed reckless. To Garner, it was certainty. And for nearly 6 decades, through fame, fatigue, and fleeting separations, they held on to each other. Their marriage wasn't without its storms. Garner once admitted that the late 1970s brought a brief separation, the strain of constant filming pulling them apart. But distance only reminded them of what mattered most. They reunited, stronger, steadier, and anchored by respect and affection. Lois never sought the limelight. She was independent, private, and the grounding presence in Garner's life. Together they raised 2 daughters, Kimberly, Lois's child from a previous marriage whom Garner adopted, and their own daughter Gigi. To his family, he wasn't the quick-witted maverick or the shrewd Jim Rockford. He was simply Dad, a man who cherished quiet evenings at home more than red carpets. In a city known for fleeting romances, James Garner's greatest role may have been this one: a devoted husband, a protective father, and a man who kept his promises. In the golden age of westerns, Jack Elam's face was unforgettable. With his wandering eye, crooked grin, and knack for mischief, he stole scenes as outlaws, drifters, and rogues. To audiences, he was the comic villain you loved to watch. But to James Garner, Jack was far more than a character actor. He was a friend, one of the rarest kinds Hollywood ever gave him. They first worked together on Support Your Local Sheriff, and later on Support Your Local Gunfighter. On screen, their chemistry was effortless, a dance of wit and timing that made each scene sparkle. Off-screen, it was something deeper. Jack was funny, gentle, and one of the most honest guys I ever met, Garner once said. He had a heart bigger than the prairie we used to ride on. In a business often fueled by ego, Elam's humility stood out. He didn't chase attention. He simply showed up, did the work, and brought joy. Their friendship was built not on fame, but on understanding. Both men had come up the hard way, with no silver spoons, only grit. They laughed together, listened to each other, and never tried to impress. Even years apart, reconnecting felt effortless. When Jack Elam passed in 2003, Garner did not mourn loudly. Instead, he honoured him with gratitude. Gratitude for the laughter, for the loyalty, and for the kind of friendship that makes Hollywood's often empty glitter feel human again. You can't fake friendship like that, Garner said, and for him, Jack Elam was proof that some bonds outlast the bright lights. Behind James Garner's effortless charm was a man quietly fighting battles few ever saw. Decades of stunts left him with crippling arthritis. Surgeries on his knees and back became routine. In 1988, a quintuple bypass reminded him of the toll fame and stress had taken. Later, a stroke in the 2000s slowed his steps but never dimmed his spirit. Through it all, he remained private, refusing to use illness as a stage. On July 19, 2014, Garner passed away peacefully at his Brentwood home, 86 years old, surrounded by the love that had anchored him all his life. The tributes that poured in spoke less of celebrity and more of character. He was remembered as a veteran, a husband, a father, and a colleague who carried dignity into every room. His true legacy was not just Maverick or the Rockford Files, though those remain immortal. It was the reminder that success does not require arrogance, that kindness can coexist with strength, and that loyalty, whether to family, to friends like Jack Elam, or to one's own values, outlasts the spotlight. James Garner taught us that being real is the greatest role of all. James Garner's story is more than Hollywood. It's about loyalty, resilience, and truth. What touched you most about his journey and his bond with Jack Elam? Share your thoughts below, join the conversation, and subscribe for more untold stories of legends who shaped our hearts.